What's up guys, my name's Brandon and I'm on a quest to test out iOS 13 on every iPhone model that is compatible, and after reviewing the iPhone SE last week, I figured it would be a good time to take a look back at the oldest iPhone compatible with iOS 13, the iPhone 6s. So in this video I just wanted to tell you guys about my experience with iOS 13 here on the iPhone 6s. I've been using it for about a week now on iOS 13 beta, and so in this video I wanted to let you know about the new features, the performance, the battery life, and how they all run exclusively here on the iPhone 6s. Now for those with an iPhone 7, don't worry, that video is coming next, so definitely make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I will be doing an iOS 13 on iPhone 7 video next. So like I mentioned, let's start with the new features here in iOS 13. Now I'm sure most of you guys know about the major new features in iOS 13 by now if you've been watching my videos, but I just wanted to talk about my experience with them on the 6s specifically, because every iPhone handles features differently. Like for example, the iPhone SE does not have 3D touch. So we don't have a pressure sensitive home screen like we do here on the iPhone 6s. So that alone means that we do have actual 3D touch here on the iPhone 6s, whereas on the iPhone SE, we have kind of something that emulates that, like a long press with iOS 13. So that is definitely a difference here between these two. Even though they are very similar, that is the first difference I wanted to discuss. So if you guys have been watching my videos, you know that iOS 13 has a really weird thing going on with 3D touch and haptic touch right now. So we have haptic touch on a phone like the iPhone XR here, which doesn't have a pressure sensitive screen, but it was the first iPhone to actually have 3D touch like capabilities without actually having a pressure sensitive home screen, and that's because of the haptic touch that was introduced with the XR. But now in iOS 13, all phones have this, but it's not technically called haptic touch. It's basically just a long press because we don't have haptic feedback on a phone like the iPhone SE. But now every phone has these long press gestures and these long press menus, but it started to be an issue in iOS 13 when 3D touch devices like the iPhone 6s and above weren't actually being able to use 3D touch, and it instead just used haptic touch. So you can see here, I don't have to put any pressure and it will still pull up that menu. That's not 3D touch, that's haptic touch. 3D touch is when I put pressure on the screen and press down harder, and that gets me to that menu. So this proves that 3D touch is not being used. It's kind of mixing in haptic touch and 3D touch, and it makes for a very confusing experience here on iOS 13, at least in the beta stages, because we do know via Apple that this is in fact a bug and it will get worked out in a later version of iOS 13. So for example, one of the biggest benefits of having 3D touch is going to be the ability to peek and pop, but with iOS 13, since there is this bug, you cannot peek and pop. You can see I can peek, but if I press down harder, it doesn't actually pop into the window there. It just gives me these options right here because it's actually picking up a haptic press or a long press instead of the 3D touch pressure sensitive press. So I'm sorry if that's a little bit confusing to you guys, but hopefully you do understand what I'm talking about here. So 3D touch can't be used to its full potential in iOS 13 just yet. Now, if you are watching this video when the final version of iOS 13 comes out, it may be fixed by then. And of course, I will make another video on the iPhone 6s on iOS 13 when it officially gets released in September. But as of right now, it's a very confusing experience with iOS 13 and 3D touch. Now, we do have the new volume HUD here in iOS 13. You can see that over there on the left-hand side. It starts out big and then it gets smaller as you keep pressing the volume buttons right here. And this is really nice, especially on a small 4.7-inch screen. Now I say small, but that's just because I'm comparing it to the phones that I normally use, like the iPhone XS Max and the iPhone XR. So going back to the smaller screen, it was nice to see that volume HUD, not taking up the full extent of the screen, especially on a smaller phone like the 6s here. And if we go into our settings and go down to display and brightness, you can see we do have dark mode here in iOS 13 as well. We can just flip it over to dark and you can see it looks really good here. We do also have the automatic setting right here, which has some options, so we can have it set to sunset to sunrise, so it'll be bright during the day and dark at night, and it will change automatically. Or you can have a custom schedule set up. If you go to sleep at a certain time, you wake up at a certain time, you can go ahead and set that. I personally like using the sunset to sunrise feature there. It is really nice. But you can see dark mode here. Let me go ahead and turn it off automatically and show you around. You can see the settings. Looks really nice. Now we don't have an OLED panel. We do have an LCD screen here on the iPhone 6s, so you're not going to see a lot of like battery improvements and things like that, but you are still going to get a really cool looking UI throughout all of iOS. even inside of Safari. You know, some of these Safari websites will support dark mode. If we go into our music, you can see the music has this dark interface, which looks really cool. So it's really cool just aesthetically. Again, you're not going to be getting any kind of battery enhancements because of this, because we don't have an OLED panel like the iPhone 10 and above. But dark mode is still very nice to see, and I know a lot of you guys are going to be excited about dark mode here on the iPhone 6s and the fact that it's not exclusive to just OLED screens. Messages also looks really cool with a dark mode. And speaking of messages and that keyboard, we do now also have a swipe keyboard here with iOS 13. So you can see here I can go ahead and swipe on the keyboard and type just like so. So this is just like Gboard, but it's now built in to iOS 13, which is really nice. Again, especially on a smaller screen like this 4.7-inch screen here on the iPhone 6s. Now, unlike the iPhone SE, I actually found that I don't prefer the swipe keyboard on the iPhone 6s. Maybe it's just because it has a slightly bigger screen. You know, if you guys watched my iPhone SE video, I did actually prefer the swipe keyboard, but I don't here on the iPhone 10s. It's still nice to have, and you may be a bigger fan of that. That's just a personal, you know, preference. But I do like the size of the keyboard on the 6s, so that was not really a huge deal to me. So also inside of the music application, we have the really cool karaoke style lyrics here on the iPhone 6s, and I showed this on the iPhone SE as well. It's really cool to see these features being on the older phones as well, because you can see karaoke style lyrics as the artist is singing. It actually changes and it goes. You can actually scroll here as well if you want to skip ahead in the song and go to a certain lyric. You can click on it just like so, and to get out of here, you just click on the annotations, or to get into there and out, you can just do like so there. And of course, there are tons of other features here in iOS 13 on the iPhone 6s. I have multiple videos showing you guys the features. Those are going to be down in the description below if you want to check those out. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we get nearly every feature that the $1,000 phones like the iPhone 10s, 10s Max get, you know, the fact that we have those here on the iPhone 6s is just amazing. And just like I said in the iPhone SE video, this really tells you a lot about Apple and how well they optimize their software. And it's really promising if you're someone who, you know, tends to keep iPhones for a long period of time. It's really nice to see that Apple's not making most of these features, especially the bigger features, exclusive to newer iPhones. So this is great news if you have a 6s, if you have a 7, even an 8 at this point. It's really good to be able to forecast the future and know that it's, you know, you're not going to be left out in future iOS updates. And I say left out in terms of features because this is probably going to be the last update for the iPhone 6s. I doubt this is going to be supported with iOS 14, but it's still awesome that you get a full another year with iOS 13 here of full support and really good stability, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. So now let's talk about that performance that I was just mentioning here with this iPhone 6s. So performance has actually been pretty solid for me here on iOS 13. There are still a lot of app crashes. I noticed that eBay bugs out a lot, especially when you go to like the selling section. It crashes a lot here on the 6s. That's on every phone. Twitch has some bugs. Amazon has some bugs. Pretty much all applications have bugs if they haven't been updated since iOS 13 came out in the beta stage. But even though there are minor bugs in applications, there's really nothing in iOS 13 that makes this software unusable on the iPhone 6s. Now, if you're watching this when the final version comes out, there won't even be any of the issues with the applications because every developer is going to have their application updated. So you're not going to have to deal with any kind of app crashes or glitches inside of applications or anything like that. Now, I personally didn't have any issues with the keyboard like I did with the iPhone SE. The iPhone SE had a really glitchy, a really laggy keyboard, and it would, you know, not be responsive sometimes. I would have to force close out of applications that were using it to get it back to normal, but I've not faced that on the iPhone 6s, so that is a good sign there. Now, speaking of the iPhone SE in comparison to the iPhone 6s, these guys have the exact same processor inside, and that's going to be Apple's A9 chipset. However, I honestly found the SE to be a tiny bit snappier and more responsive than the iPhone 6s. Now, that could just be because the iPhone 6s has a little bit more pixels, you know, a bigger screen has more pixels to push than the iPhone SE, but honestly, you're really not going to notice it day to day. Like your average user isn't going to notice it. I only noticed it because I test these phones, I put them up against each other, I use them, you know, multiple times a week. But a more fair comparison would actually be to compare iOS 13 on the iPhone 6s to iOS 12 on the iPhone 6s. And to that, I would say that the 6s is faster and smoother even on this public beta of iOS 13 than it was on any version of iOS 12, which is extremely impressive given that we're, again, in beta stages right now. But then again, it does kind of make sense because iOS 13 is probably going to be the final release for the iPhone 6s here. We're probably not going to have iOS 14 on the iPhone 6s, so Apple wants to make sure it's as stable and as smooth as possible. And one thing I had to get used to was flipping up the control center from the bottom instead of the top. That took me a long while. I'm going to go ahead and get out of dark mode here just so you guys can see the screen a little bit better on camera. And now let's talk about the battery life here in iOS 13. So iOS 13, the battery life on the iPhone 6s is is not very good. I mean, it was pretty good on the SE on iOS 13, but for some reason the iPhone 6s is not getting good battery life despite having a slightly larger battery inside than the iPhone SE over here. So I'm not sure why that is. Again, it could just be because we have a bigger screen here than we do on the iPhone SE, but battery life is not that great. I'm averaging only around 4 hours of usage on a single charge, and the battery capacity, if we go in here, you can see is at 89%. So it's not a bad battery capacity for an iPhone 6s, but at the same time, it's not great either. My iPhone SE actually has a higher capacity. I believe it's at 91%. But if you take a look at that feature down there, optimized battery charging, that is something that you should enable here in iOS 13 on the iPhone 6s. I recommend this for pretty much any phone, especially the older phones, because really you're looking for anything to improve battery life because it's not going to be as good as the newer phones. But you can see there, Apple says to reduce battery aging, iPhone learns from your daily charging routine, so it can wait to finish charging past 80% until you need to use it. So it's not always going to be accurate. It does depend on, AI, machine learning to learn your schedule and things like that, but it is definitely worth having enabled here to try to save some battery life and also to keep your battery capacity, your maximum capacity at the highest it could possibly be. So yeah, battery life is definitely better on iOS 12 on the iPhone 6s than it is on iOS 13. And this could change when the final version of iOS 13 gets released. Again, I will be making an updated video on the iPhone 6s when that final version does get released to the public this fall. But that leads me to the next question that I know a lot of people are asking. Should I install iOS 13 on my daily driver, which is the 6s right now? So I know a lot of people still use the iPhone 6s as their daily driver. I'm actually really surprised to see how many people use this as their daily driver. I see it in my comments all the time. So should you install this? And to that, I would say yes. Go ahead and install the public beta. I will have a link to how to install the public beta. If you haven't installed it already, I will have that down in the description below. But I would say go ahead and install it on your iPhone 6s. It's not bad. It's actually pretty stable for a beta. I have not had any random reboots or crashes or anything like that. Like on the Springboard, I've had app crashes, but that's expected, but nothing really major throughout the OS. And it's actually pretty surprising. Now, like I mentioned, battery life isn't great, but your experience may be different. I have people with different opinions and different experiences on battery life every single time I upload a video. So your experience may be different. And the good thing is you can always downgrade back to iOS 12 using the video I just made, a couple days ago down in the description below. Using that video, you can downgrade back to iOS 12 if you wish to do so. So it may be worth checking out. I don't see any issue with installing it on your daily driver. But again, every experience is different. Maybe if you wanted to wait a little bit, maybe wait until, the next public beta comes out or something like that. But for me personally, I could actually use this on a daily basis. So anyways, that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. This was the iPhone 6s on iOS 13. Let me know down in a comment below if you have an iPhone 6s and if you're running iOS 13 yet. Are you waiting? What's your experience been like? Let me know everything about you iPhone 6s users. I want to know everything about your experience with iOS 13. Of course, make sure you guys do follow me over on Twitter and Instagram. All those links are down below. And of course, subscribe so you can see my follow-up video on iOS 13 on the iPhone 6s this fall. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching the video, and I'll see you soon.